Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block: politics, perspectives, and players. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the world's most wanted terrorist and the brutal leader of ISIS, died at his own hand after being cornered by the U.S. Special Forces on a raid in Syria. Critical intelligence for that raid was reportedly provided by the Kurds, who fought at the sharp end of the spear against ISIS as Western allies. Now many, however, are fleeing for their lives. Joining me now is Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, the Kurdish regional government representative to Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Rahman, I know you've been very busy in these past couple of weeks on Capitol Hill meeting with American lawmakers. What's your message been to them?
Well, I've primarily focused on events in Kurdistan region and Iraq, but of course also on what's happening in our neighborhood, in particular what we see as the potential fallout of recent developments in Syria. There are many issues that we're concerned about, security issues, and of course humanitarian, which I think sometimes is lost in this conversation about what's happening in Syria.
One of the big events that's playing in a lot of people's minds, of course, is the death of Mr. al-Baghdadi, one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, the leader of ISIS. The Kurds have come out and said that they had a key role in that operation, that they provided intelligence. In fact, they may have had an operative who collected Mr. Baghdadi's underwear to verify the DNA test on him. Can you speak to the role that the Kurdish forces played in terms of working with the U.S. Special Forces to capture Mr. Baghdadi and ultimately resulting in his taking of his own life?
Well, I have to be honest, I don't know the details because that's not my field, but certainly the Kurds have a close working relationship with the United States. Baghdadi and ISIS have been great enemies of the people of Kurdistan, but also people of Syria and Iraq as a whole, and the international community. So it's in all of our interests to cooperate. Obviously, in that part of the world, we have very good intelligence, very good human intelligence. Of course, we rely on technology like our advanced partners who have that kind of technology, but really for us, it's human technology, it's accurate, it's on the ground, and I have to say it's very, very brave. So I'm very proud of any role that the Kurds have played in this and other operations, and I think the takedown of Baghdadi symbolically is very important, but it still leaves ISIS as an organization. It doesn't really meet the demands and the need for justice from the victims of ISIS, and especially I'm thinking of the Yazidis and the Christians who suffered genocide at the hands of that terrible organization.
President Trump has announced that he's withdrawing American forces from Syria. Of course, the Turkish government has launched incursions into Syria, attacking the Kurds in that area. When you heard the president make that announcement, what went through your mind?
Well, to be honest, we have heard President Trump say that before. I believe he said it on 2, maybe 3 occasions. And so in some ways, it was expected that the U.S. would want to leave Syria, and President Trump had definitely expressed that desire previously. I think what took us aback, what surprised us, was the sudden way it was announced. It's understandable that the U.S. would want to leave Syria someday, and maybe Iraq and Afghanistan someday too, but we hope it will be done in an orderly way, not leaving others vulnerable or exposed to negotiating in a very weak position. So, as I said, I don't think there was a surprise because President Trump had certainly flagged this earlier, but it was perhaps the manner and the speed with which which it was done. But anyway, since then, President Trump has announced now that some U.S. forces will stay behind, largely to protect oil fields. I think that is significant. We must protect oil fields and other potential sources of revenue from ISIS. And it's also important that all of those ISIS prisoners and ISIS camps, if you like, are still under lock and key, and they're in Kurdish-held areas of Syria.
There have been calls in Canada to bring home Canadians who traveled to Iraq and to Syria to fight with ISIS. There's been concern that some of those camps they were being held at by the Kurds have been disrupted by these Turkish offensive operations. What's the situation on the ground right now in terms of those Kurdish camps that were holding ISIS prisoners? Are they still intact, or are all those prisoners now still out on the loose?
My understanding is that some prisoners did escape, perhaps a week or two ago now. But otherwise, generally, the camps and the prisons are under control. But even before the announcement by President Trump, these prisons, these camps were a concern, and they remain a concern. The numbers are huge. Al-Hol camp holds thousands and thousands of people. The conditions aren't very good. It's really, we've been signaling this for a very long time. These really, and there are camps like that in Iraq too, by the way. There's no real care, and by care I don't mean a luxury lifestyle. What I mean is there are children in these camps. Okay, their parents are ISIS fighters and they believe in the ideology, but why aren't we doing something about the children? Otherwise, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, these children will be teenagers, they will be adults. All they will have known is growing up in a camp rampant with ideology that is all about death and destruction. And this will have happened while we have let them grow up in this atmosphere. So these camps, whether they're in Syria, Iraq, or elsewhere, all of us collectively, the international community in particular, need to be much more mindful that we're not producing future ISIS fighters, whatever name they might call themselves. And so while these camps, in Syria are under protection now, it doesn't really deal with a bigger question that has always existed. Don't just leave it to the Iraqis and the Syrians or the Kurds to just manage these camps. This is the responsibility of the international community, and I would include Canada, and I would include the UK and France and Germany and the United States in that. It's our collective responsibility to deal with these camps and to ensure we don't have future fighters who are now growing up there.
So if you were able to speak to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today, you would ask the Canadian government to bring the Canadians who fought for ISIS back to Canada?
I do believe it's the responsibility of every country, every government, to bring back its own nationals and put them on trial. And that would be my message to Prime Minister Trudeau. I understand that some countries are concerned that perhaps they don't have enough evidence to convict somebody, that perhaps the laws of certain European and Western countries are such that after 10 years or so those people would be released. Well, perhaps it's time that you looked at your laws, but you can't just shirk your responsibility and dump these serious global problems on those of us in the Middle East who have to live with it day in, day out.
With what's happened with the situation of Turkey targeting the Kurds in Syria, the Kurdish forces worked very closely with the Canadian Special Operations Forces in Iraq, worked with many Western militaries, really at the front end of the battle against ISIS. Those countries have been very muted in their response to Turkey. Are you disappointed with the international response, including Canada's response to the Turkish government's actions?
Well, I understand Turkey is an important NATO ally for the United States and other countries, and that has to be kept in consideration. I think what's really important is that there are so many factors that need to be taken into consideration. The border area is a heavily populated area. Qamishli, Amuda, many other cities along that border are heavily populated. So what's going to happen to that population? There are currently 200,000 or 300,000 Syrians from around that area who have been internally displaced. The longer they are displaced, the longer they're not able to return to their homes, the more likely that they will cross over and come to Iraqi Kurdistan. And we in Iraqi Kurdistan are already taking care of 1 million displaced Iraqis and Syrian refugees who fled in 2011 and 12. Our population in Iraqi Kurdistan is 5 million. We're already taking care of 1 million displaced people and refugees. We are not in a position to receive another 200,000 or 300,000 new refugees from Syria. We can take them in, but we can't feed them, we can't clothe them, we have no shelter for them. And we are asking the international community to be aware of this. Let those displaced people return home. Otherwise, if they come over to Iraqi Kurdistan, we will urgently need very urgent, large-scale humanitarian support, and I hope Canada will play a role in that. Don't leave us to carry the burden alone. Please come and help us. But ideally, they should really be allowed to go home now to their own homes and to stay there.
Over 11,000 Kurdish fighters died fighting ISIS. Is there a feeling in the Kurdish community that there's a betrayal here, that the international community is now looking the other way after working so closely with them?
11,000 Kurdish fighters died in Syria, and in Iraq 2,000 Peshmerga died, and thousands on both sides were injured. So certainly we have paid the price fighting ISIS with our blood. The international community, of course, has been an important partner with equipping, training, providing resources, but nothing replaces blood at the end of the day. We've given enormous sacrifice. So I think that partnership needs to be borne in mind. Definitely when President Trump first announced the withdrawal, there was a sense of shock and bewilderment. Over time, we've seen that President Trump has said some forces will stay behind. The US Congress has spoken out very, very openly, very strongly. There are various resolutions and bills that are being discussed. And I think it's become clear that this was a political decision, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what other Americans would want.
What will happen if you don't get the access to the humanitarian assistance or military assistance that your people are asking for?
To be honest, I think the military relationship between the United States and the SDF in Syria will continue. That's how it appears, even though it's a very fluid situation and it changes day by day. With us in Iraq, in Iraqi Kurdistan, we have a very strong partnership with the United States, and both sides have reiterated their commitment to that. With regards to the humanitarian fallout, we're very concerned that if hundreds of thousands of Syrian Kurds cross over into Iraqi Kurdistan, that we will have a humanitarian catastrophe on our hands, just because we don't have the wherewithal to cope with another new influx. As I said, we have 1 million that we're already taking care of. The international community has drawn down its assistance in Iraq by 50% over the past year. In Iraqi Kurdistan, the 1 million that we're taking care of, 70% of the cost is borne by us. We provide healthcare, education, policing, hygiene, whatever you need to provide to a population, we provide it. The international community only provides 30% of their needs, and it's decreasing day by day. So we're not in a position to be able to take care of the new children and the new women and men who arrive. And these are people who arrive with their own health conditions. Some of them need kidney dialysis. Some of them have cancer and they need treatment for that, or pregnant women. I mean, these are people like you and me. They have healthcare needs, they have educational needs. So who's going to take care of that? We don't get much help from the federal government in Baghdad, if any. The international community is reducing its assistance. So again, we're being left to bear the brunt of it, and I hope that the international community is listening. I hope Canada, which has always acted responsibly, is listening and will help us with this.
Ms. Abdul Rahman, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share our story with you.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us. For the West Block, I'm Mercedes Stevenson.